Hey friends, and welcome in to A Walk Through the Word, Daily Bread with Crystal Fry. I am your host, Crystal Fry, and dear friends, it's time to let go of the struggle and simply surrender it all. Joining me on the podcast this week is new friend from across the world, Natasha Lévai. Natasha is a wife and mother, food blogger, and ministry worker. She's passionate about caring for her family and others and about sharing tasty, budget-friendly recipes from her kitchen. In this episode, Natasha and I talk about how she came to faith as a teenager, ministry fatigue and missionary burnout, how her experience growing up in a broken home equipped her for ministry work in orphanages, and how becoming a mother and homemaker is transforming her relationship with God. I am filled with so much gratitude for the opportunity to share this conversation with you. And friends, I pray that you find encouragement and comfort and a reminder that God loves you no matter what season you're currently in. Be sure to check out the show notes to connect with Natasha on social media and visit her website. All right, friends, here we go. God's word is powerful. The missing link is our identity in Christ. When we know who we are and who He created us to be, that is when we can truly walk in freedom. You are never alone. There is hope, and that hope is Jesus Christ. Natasha, thank you so much for joining me here on the show today. It is such a pleasure to meet a new friend in another part of the world. I'm so excited. I love the fact that this journey has led me to get to talk to incredible people all over the world. And you are my newest non-American, like not in the States friend. So I'm so excited to have you here on the show today. I would love if you would give an introduction for any of our listeners or our watchers who may not be familiar with who you are.
Hi, Crystal. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. And my name is Natasha. I am originally from Russia. I was born in Ukraine and raised in Russia. I'm half. Half of my family are fully Ukrainian, half of my family are Russians. And I grew up in Russia in a family that was not Christian. My father was very atheistic, and my mother rather more superstitious. Like she would believe in all kinds of the superstitions, you would probably say, but she believed in a lot of things, but they weren't biblical. And I grew up knowing that there is something more to life than just what we see, that there is some higher power, but I didn't know anything about Jesus or God. I was not a part of any Sunday school or church. And at 16 years old, I started asking questions to if there is God or if there is something, and how can I reach that power, so to say. And then, long story short, I just went into a Orthodox temple because a friend of mine, she said that she has peace, when she goes to an Orthodox temple. And then from there, I started getting closer to Christianity. Although in the Orthodox faith, they didn't teach me anything about Jesus. But from there, I at least knew what Christianity is. I wasn't scared of people who would call themselves Christians and try to tell me about Jesus, because I thought, well, I'm a Christian, they're Christian, so we must believe the same thing. And that's how I came to faith, by other evangelical Christians who were evangelizing on the streets. They came to me at some point, and when we had a conversation, I didn't feel weird about it, because I felt like they're Christian, I'm a Christian, so what they're saying is something that I'm supposed to believe. And as a 17-year-old, I, of course, didn't know everything, and I knew that I don't know everything, so I believed them, what they're saying is true. And just slowly I became a believer. It wasn't like a one day happening, but I feel that the more I learned about God, more it drew me in. And then at some point I just I accepted it. And it wasn't anything drastic, one day kind of salvation, but it was rather like over a longer period of time. And then at 20, I left Russia and went to Hungary to study at a Bible school because I couldn't find my place, I guess, in the world, and heard about missions, wasn't sure what it is, and got this opportunity to study abroad, to study the Bible. And I thought, why not? Because I didn't have kind of a purpose in my life or something that I really wanted to do or dream, or something I wanted to study. And so I decided that just give this time to God and let him show me what's next. And I ended up doing School of Missions and staying for 1 year of internship. And after that, I was looking for a place to do missions. And again, long story short, I was looking at all kinds of places. First it was Guatemala, then Philippines, then whatnot, Africa. I don't know. But I ended up staying in Hungary, in Western Hungary, and spent 2 years there helping at the church. I don't know what you would call really missions in today's world, but it was missions, but it was very different from what I would imagine before, as what a missionary would do. And after 2 years, I left because certain things were very difficult and I got depressed, and then I had to leave. And I wasn't sure if I would ever do ministry again at that point. But after a few months at my friend's house, who invited me over to, just recover and pray and see what's next, and what even am I going to do in my life, being depressed, and just how do I get out of it, and how do I find a purpose? And after those few months, I came back to Hungary, and I thought I wasn't going to do ministry anymore, like full-time missions, but I kind of did get back into it in a different way. And I was mostly caring for orphans, going to the orphanages in Hungary. And I was doing it for about 1 month when COVID started. And that's when everything closed and nobody was going nowhere to no orphanages. And so at that point, I was just stuck in an apartment for 1 or 2 months. I was just by myself. I only met with a few believers locally here on Sundays or Saturdays sometimes. And I didn't know anybody here. It was a foreign town to me. And again, long story short, that's how I met my husband, because he was one person in that little church home group that I was attending on Sundays during COVID. And now I stayed here in this town that was absolutely foreign to me in 2020. And now I have a family, and we have a 1-year-old little baby girl that just turned 1 this month. And yeah, and I'm learning how to be a settled person now, not traveling all over the world.
That's so beautiful, Natasha. And so one of the things about these guest episodes that excites me so much is that I get to hear other people's stories. And as I listen to you talk about, growing up and, understanding that there is something more, and kind of just how you progressed into that, it's always beautiful for me to, again, from the outside looking in, to see how God was weaved into your life. And it's beautiful when we can take our story and look back and see that, while in the middle of everything, it's hard to see where this is going, right? Because as you said, you decided, you had an opportunity to study. You took the opportunity, which is incredible, but then things got difficult. And as you are doing work for the Lord, and listen, any person who spends time doing mission work, especially abroad, will tell you that it does take a toll, because you see things that people who are not in mission work don't see, and they don't have, an idea. They don't have an understanding of what it really is like going into places where people are desperate for, not only for God, but they're desperate to simply be taken care of. And the things that are so needed for our fellow human beings in this world. But it's just so beautiful to listen to you tell the story and know that you were doing this work, and then you mentioned this time of depression, and my brain is like, okay, so there's a pause, right? There's a pause. Like God needed for you to be still in this one place and allow other things to be orchestrated, because then, here now you're working with orphans, and then COVID hits. So again, it's one of those things where, okay, now I'm doing something. Oh, nope, now I have to sit here and be still again.
Yeah.
But from that stillness, God led you to your husband. And now now you have a family. Now you have a beautiful 1-year-old girl who, none of that would have happened if way back in the beginning you hadn't been at least curious enough to say, all right, well, God, I don't know what it is that you want me to do, but I'm going to give this time to you and see where it leads. And
Mhm.
how incredibly beautiful that is to just hear your surrender, that you were willing to say, God, I'm just going to let you lead me, because there are so many people in this world who wouldn't even imagine, having the courage to say, Lord, lead the way. So I'm just so grateful that you share that story. And that leads us beautifully into my next question, which is my favorite. And that simply is, tell us a little bit more about how your faith has impacted your life.
It definitely changed the course of my life because, at the point where I met Jesus, I had all kinds of dreams as a little teenage girl, be an actress or be a scientist. And I wanted everything at the same time. I was also a dancer. I did hip hop dancing, and I studied at the theater for 1 year because I really wanted so many things at different points of life and didn't really like I just wanted a big life. I think that's what I wanted. I wanted to be big. I wanted to have a name and be famous and do something great in this life. That was my whole point and purpose. And I think partially the reason why that was my purpose is because I grew up in a fairly broken family, and I think I was looking for love and care outside of my family. And I thought that if I only become famous, then people will love me and recognize me, and then I will be somebody in somebody's eyes, in other people's eyes. And I think when I became a believer, I realized that God loves me just as I am, and I don't necessarily need to prove him anything. And at that point, when I realized it, of course, it was gradual and step by step. um, I think so many things changed. I guess it even changed the way I looked, because as a teenage girl in high school, I really cared about how I look and my hair and my makeup and my clothes. And then maybe it's not the best thing to do, but I think I just stopped caring at all for some time. And then I started rethinking what really is my purpose in life, and what does God want me to do? And then I had this fear in me that maybe God doesn't want me to, be an actress. Maybe he doesn't want me to pursue my own popularity. And at that point, I think when my purpose and passion were taken away, where I couldn't find justification of how, as a Christian, why would that be my purpose in life? I think I felt a bit lost, and it was easier for me to give my life to God in that way, that, you kind of lead the way, because I didn't really have anything to hold on to. My family wasn't a place where I felt at home. I didn't have any regrets leaving them behind, and haven't been back home for 5 years now. And honestly, like, maybe my mom and my sister I miss, but that, we can talk online sometimes, and it's not that I even miss home so much. And for me, it wasn't that hard to leave my country, and it was rather exciting. And I think my faith probably guided my whole entire life. Like, God guided my whole entire life, because at some point I realized I don't have my map for my life, kind of was now erased, and I need a new one, and I have no idea what it's going to be like. And God didn't give me a map. He just gave the next step, always, one step at a time. And still to this day, I I'm careful, and I want really to know what God wants from me. And in a way, it is a bit harder to know that I am following God right now, because I am taking care of a baby. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I'm not doing anything great, so to say, like people that we hear about in Africa or somewhere else. And sometimes I, ask myself, like, how is my life different from, any other person in this world? But then this way I'm learning a new side of God and a new side of being in a relationship with him, when you don't necessarily see any, when you're not necessarily in very tangible, how to say, missionary situation. Although we still do ministry, and we still visit orphanages, and we still have the kids over, still, like, my day-to-day life mostly looks like just taking care of, a household. So I guess even now my faith is kind of transforming, and sometimes I'm afraid, that what if I'm not following God anymore? But I think that God always comforts me and reminds me that, stay-at-home moms also have a place to be in this life.
Oh, absolutely. And Natasha, you said three things while you were talking that I had to make myself little notes about. And I want to start with what you just said about stay-at-home moms. We recently, just a few weeks ago, had another guest on, and her name was Lori Hatcher. And that was one of the things that she talked about, because she was a stay-at-home mom, and she homeschooled her kids for uh, they were well, she homeschooled them all the way. So she spent, you know, a decade and a half, if not more, at home homeschooling her girls.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, before they had children, her and her husband were, they were doing something almost every night of the week. They were taking kids here. They were doing this at the church. They were, it was all very public, if you will. Their service was very public. Their ministry was very public. And then when their first daughter was born, she had colic. And so she, it really pulled Lori into the house, and that's where she was. And she started to get that same kind of feeling like, I'm not serving God, in this big way anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
he so gently and tenderly reminded her that just because your service looks different doesn't mean that it's any less important. And,
Mm-hmm.
as moms, we are responsible for our children and for instilling values into them and helping them navigate and teaching them the life lessons that, they're going to need to be good human beings. And so I always want to give hugs to, because I was a stay-at-home mom with both of my children. So
Mm-hmm.
I know the feeling of like, okay, well, I'm just here with this child. Like is that it? But it is so important. So I want to offer some encouragement to you in that respect as well, and know that it is God gives us these children, and they're not just a blessing, but they are of highest priority for us. And and so then I laughed at what you said, that God didn't give you the map; He just gives you one step at a time. Because I keep asking Him to give me the whole map, and He's like, "No, you can't handle it." Like, we're just gonna take it one step at a time. So I can completely relate to that. And then the other thing, when you talked about kind of having like a reset on the value that you placed on your appearance. So again, going from being really concerned about hair and makeup and all the things, and like what people saw, uh and then just to kind of be like, I don't really know if any of this is important. And so to kind of go to the polar opposite, I did the exact same thing when I left my corporate job. So I was
Mm-hmm.
very concerned about, because I was dealing with people and all of the things, and the position that I was in put me in the public a lot. And so my physical appearance was of great importance to me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I left that job, I actually experienced 3 months of what I would call um, a depressive decompression. And as I was kind of decompressing from 13 years of a corporate career, it
Mm-hmm.
was borderline depression, because I just felt like I had no direction. God led me to leave this job.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so hard. I was really excited, and then at the same time, I was like, "Well, God, you didn't give me anything next. So now I'm just here, and I don't know what to do." And so I just didn't I was like, "Nope, I don't really care about anything right now." Um, and I say that just to say, I think that there are times in our lives when God has to essentially strip us down and take away all of the other things so that we can eliminate distractions and be able to more deeply connect with him and
Mm-hmm.
come to that place of saying, God, none of this stuff is really important. I want to be about what is important to you. And it's
Mm-hmm.
hard for us to do that when we're concerned with all of these other things. It's hard unless you are like, now I'm in a place where I talk to God while I put on my makeup and, decide whether or not I'm going to blow dry my hair for the day. But now I can do that. Whereas before, I really think that God takes us sometimes into a place where, and our mutual friend Wendy has a similar story where when she moved to Serbia and was completely immersed in a place that she didn't know and didn't, couldn't even speak the language, she was like, it really brought me down into a place of, God, do you still love me if I can't do all of these things? And
Mm-hmm.
of course, the answer to that is yes. Always yes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're right. It does take some time for you to get used to the fact that even if you're stripped of everything, God still loves you. And then there comes a point where you're okay, doing all these other things and still feeling connection to God. But then there needs to be a little bit of a period of time. You know how little caterpillar becomes a butterfly. It needs to be in this little cocoon. So it's kind of similar that you look like something in between, and then eventually God makes you look like all the other people. But he needs some time to speak to you personally in that place.
That's a beautiful analogy. The cocoon, right? So here we are as little caterpillar people going around, and then God pulls us into this place. And it is oftentimes a place of isolation. And even if we're surrounded by people, it can be definitely a time of personal isolation
Mm-hmm.
where people may be around, but we don't necessarily feel connected to them. And God is really doing some transformative work while he's pulled us away and kind of closed us off to himself and allowing us in that isolation to understand and come to realize more fully that it's him that we depend on.
Mm-hmm.
We're these last couple of years since I left my corporate job have been an incredible time of really learning how to trust him fully
Mm-hmm.
for everything. I mean, really, really, really learning to trust him for everything. And it's been a time where he has shown me again and again and again that he is God, and his word is real and his promises are real and true. And it's not just, oh, well, God said he was the provider, but he's not providing anything. Like, that is not the case. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I think we definitely have to be pulled away and spend some time in the cocoon before we can come back out and be like, oh, hey, let me tell you about this great thing that God did, because someone else is facing the same challenges that you were. And
Yeah,
now God can use you to help them through their challenge.
definitely. Yeah, I think I had many of those cocoon experiences, partially even in on the mission field during those 2 years, partially in COVID. I think those times when you're going through them, they don't necessarily feel like anything significant. And a lot of times you think you're just wasting time. But then when you're out, you look back and think, interesting, actually, God did do something in that time. And if I didn't have that time, maybe I would look at the world differently today. And I personally look back on that time, and I was living in an apartment all by myself during COVID, and I would wake up and then I had a few audiobooks that I would listen to, and then I would have a devotional that I could have for hours I could, journal or read or pray. And it was very kind of integrated everything. I like journaling. When I have some thoughts in my mind, I can journal about what I'm reading and then pray about something, and kind of like having this conversation, ongoing conversation with God and yourself too. And I could do it for hours, and then it was also good weather at that point. It was in the spring, so I could sit outside and then listen to those audiobooks and have lunch by myself, go to the store, come home, and not have anybody around. And it sometimes felt lonely and like too much. But then I think now there is no way I could have, hours and hours to spend by myself journaling or thinking or listening to books. And I think that time was precious because I think I was able to go deeper down into my own thoughts, my own feelings, reading the Bible more closely, paying attention to details. And even now I read my Bible and I see a lot of highlights that remind me of those moments, when I actually highlighted this, and it makes me think of, why did I highlight this specific, point? And then it makes me think of something that comes to my mind, and I think that those moments are happening all the time. It's not that we are, a caterpillar at some point and then we have one cocoon experience and then we're a butterfly. But I think it is constantly, continuously happening in our life, that God is working in us more and more, and He gives those periods of time. For us, it was similar with the baby. I think she also had stomach pain because she got a lot of antibiotics in her first 2 weeks for an infection that she had, and she was crying nonstop when she came home. It was really hard because we not only we didn't sleep, but also when she was awake, she was mostly crying, sometimes for hours on end. And we didn't know what to do. Nothing was, helping. She couldn't get comforted by anything, only by food. But then she would cry after food because her stomach is hurting, and then you don't know, should you feed her more because that comforts her, but also that gives her pain, and that kind of struggle. I think it also brought us together with my husband too, going through this difficult time. And I'm sure that probably it brought me closer to God in some way. Just hard to remember anything from that period of time anymore, because I just remember the crying baby. And then now that we're out of that period, I see that there was an end to it, and even though it felt like there is no end. And now I can look back and analyze what happened in a
And
way.
that's a really good example. And my heart goes out to you. Excuse me. I was fortunate that neither one of my boys were colicky or had, difficulty with things like that. But I know how stressful it is when they have times of nothing, like nothing makes them happy, nothing
Mhm.
really comforts them. And as a parent, and I think especially as a mom, we kind of take on this thought and this idea that, we're designed to have all of the solutions for this child, right? We're designed to have all of the solutions for this baby. And when we can't provide that solution for them, what that does to our heart, and how that makes us feel like, oh no, maybe, maybe I'm not a good mom. I mean, just all of the crazy things that the enemy will try to throw at you
Yeah.
that are completely untrue. But it's beautiful to be able to look back at that time and now be able to encourage others to say, listen, for you it was a crying baby. For other people, it could be, a difficult relationship. It could be financial struggle. It could be,
Mhm.
any number of things. But to be able to encourage others to say, listen, whatever your hard time is, you're not in it by yourself. God is with you, one, first and foremost, but you're also not the only one to experience this thing. When
Mhm.
God isolates us, it's for our good. When the enemy attempts to isolate us, it's in an attempt to isolate us and to make us believe that we are alone and that God can't help us and that, we're just
Mhm.
all of those things. So I love that you now have, excuse me, I love that you now have the experience to turn back and say, whatever that hard thing is, you will one day come out on the other side and be able to look back at it. And like you said, it's hard to think about the lessons from that time because the crying baby is what you remember. But I know that God was using that as a time for you to be strengthened, to lean on him more, especially when we don't have the answers. It's always an opportunity for us to lean in more to him.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm just thinking with with having a baby, it also shaped me a lot. I think there are very few things in life that will force you to do something than a baby, because when you have a child, you have to take care of them. Even if you absolutely don't want, nothing in you wants to get up right now at 2 a.m. and go take care of the baby, but because you are super tired and you've been doing this for months and months, but you have to, because otherwise, the baby's going to cry and nothing is going to change. And I think those moments when you really don't want to do something because you would rather rest or go on a walk, take a break, read a book, um, meet with a friend, you still have to continue doing the same tasks over and over again. I think that also shaped me in some way, and I think it made me even more capable of things. I think back, when I was pregnant still, and when we got married and then we got pregnant, and during that time when we would go to the orphanages, I felt a little bit like it was hard for me in some ways, because we had our little, place at home where it was nice and calm, and then we would go out into the orphanage where everybody's screaming. There's a lot of things going on, and it's kids. So sometimes it might be a bit hard, especially when kids, don't know how to relate. They don't have parents to show them love, and they constantly hit each other, say mean things to each other, and try to self-protect from you, and don't trust you either. And it can be hard. But then now that I've been taking care of a baby this whole time for 1 year, now I have fun going to the orphanage because it gives me a break in some way from home. My husband's mom comes over to watch our daughter when we go on Saturdays, and it on one hand feels like a break, and also I feel more able to talk with them, more prepared, because at home I always have to interact with someone. I always have to take care of someone and get outside of my comfort zone constantly. And I think even though every single day there are moments when I feel that it's too much, I just want a break, it shapes me, and it gives me more strength to do other things, which I'm thankful for, even though sometimes it seems that 1, 2 children is enough. I don't understand how some people have 7, 10, 15. But I on one hand it's hard, but on the other hand I see the positive effects of it. And going into it, I thought of that because I'm naturally not a very much mother-like person, and I actually, when I was younger, I thought I will never get married, didn't want to get married, wanted to stay single my whole life, didn't want to have any children. And going into this whole family life thing, I knew that maybe it is going to limit me in many ways, and maybe in some you know some parts of it I maybe will not enjoy as much as some other women who feel like they were born for it, but it is going to make me a better person. But being on my own, being a single missionary, like it will shape you. But I feel that for me personally, having a family shapes me way more than any outside challenges, because I can always put a boundary and say I'm not doing more. But when I am taking care of somebody, I can't necessarily say that, and then it encourages me to lean into God more, and it just prepares you to be fit for other things in life, like taking care of other people outside of your home too.
Absolutely. It increases our ability to have compassion for other people,
Yeah.
and to put others their needs before ours, and to really it when we have a family, and friends, we're using this as an example because Natasha and I can both relate to this, but trust me, this is not the only way that God shows up and shows you how to have compassion. But when when we look at it and we realize that it's not just us, because if it's just us, like you said, you can decide that you're going to journal for 3 hours, or you can decide that you're going to roll over and go back to sleep, or, whatever. If you don't feel like cooking that day, that's fine. I'll just eat some crackers and we'll be good. That's completely different from now you have a family and your roles and responsibilities are different. And along with that comes different levels of opportunity to serve and
Mm-hmm.
to be of service in different capacities. And another thing that and Lori isn't the only person who has said it or who has talked about it, but understanding that, especially for us as women, when we decide that we're going to take on this husband and have these children and all of these things, we then allow ourselves to be open, um to for God to really use us in some very unique ways, and in ways that men are not used, that fathers and husbands are not used, in ways that children are not used. But there's a very, very special role and level of compassion and care that God enables us as women, as wives, as mothers, to be able to pour out into those around us. And when we have that opportunity, if we are willing, and again, we serve a God who honors choice. So, we have the choice to decide, am I going to allow myself to learn these lessons and be of service and see where God is going to lead me in this journey, even if it's not always comfortable? Even if sometimes I just kind of want to look at him and go, what were you thinking? And why did you let me do this? But it allows us to really be shaped and be molded in ways that are going to serve not only us, but serve the kingdom of God in ways that we may never know about, but we can be assured are far reaching beyond us, because
Mm-hmm.
what we pour into our families then is poured out into the world.
Yes, and one way I see how it can apply now is with orphan children, that we continuously keep relationships and try to develop relationships. As a mom now, I understand a little bit better of what's going on in them, maybe. And also as a child who didn't really have a good, strong relationship with my family, I also know what it feels like from the inside. And then from the outside, I know what it feels like for that person that, is out there, that can be a mother figure for you. And it is interesting because at first I was on the other end of it, and I was thinking that, it's so easy to be a mother figure. And I just would find, different people in my life who would kind of be that mother for me for a certain period of time. Then there would be another one. And I thought it is very easy. And I was wondering, why isn't everybody doing this for, all the children of the world? But then when you become actually a person taking care of someone else, then you realize how it might be also difficult, but also you have an insight into how you can actually benefit them and what questions to ask. One thing I noticed with orphan kids is that a lot of times they are very closed off, but it doesn't mean that they don't want you to ask them questions. And um, sometimes, but you need to also know when and how to ask questions. And sometimes I also can understand how they feel by their behavior, because I come from a similar background. And when I can state certain thing that I think you might be feeling this way, and they think, wow, she can understand me, then it creates a connection for me. And I would love to be that mother figure for someone, although I do understand how much responsibility it carries from my own experience, because when you have somebody who's a mother figure for you, you put so much trust, so much hope in this person, that realistically that person can't really meet your expectations. They can't be there for you all the time, answer your messages or calls all the time, and they can't even stay in your life forever, probably, because you will move on with your life. They will have more children, or I don't know, or have other things happening in their life, and they might not have so much free time. And it is very disappointing when that happens, because you don't understand why they're not fulfilling your expectation and hope for them to be, everything. Even sometimes you expect them to fulfill that emptiness in you that only God can fulfill. There is some spot, in us that a mother can fill, but then there also some space that only God can fill. And I think that this experience of taking care of my own family definitely helps me to endure better when I spend time with other kids that don't have families. And I think it will teach me in many more ways later, because it's been only a couple years that I've been, in a family. But I already see how our ministry has been transformed through our experiences together. It's not as stressful nearly anymore. I remember going to the orphanage every time. I had to drag myself almost there because it was difficult, awkward, foreign language, everything. But now when we go together, we can rely on each other, and it feels more like fun. There are, of course, moments of, anxiety or insecurity when, different things happen, and kids have so many self-protective layers, that they try to protect themselves from the world, and they'll be mean sometimes, or they'll push you away. But you can work through those things, and there's always somebody to talk to about them because you go together. And I think it strengthens you in many ways. Yeah, but many more things to learn, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And, it's interesting how to take time to actually recognize how beautifully equipped you are to be serving those children in the orphanage. Because, as you said, now that you're a mom, you understand, that perspective. But because of your family background, because of what you experienced as a child, you have a unique insight into some of the thoughts that they may be having and the feelings that they may be having. God allows us to experience different things in our lives because it's equipping us to be able to help others in the same type of situation. And so I think it's incredible, again, once again, to just see the way that God has, used your experiences growing up and is now tailoring them for you to be able to walk into the orphanage and be able to relate to these kids and be able to give them something that someone who has no idea, who grew up with two wonderful loving parents and nobody ever fought or argued, and it was just, like the perfect utopian childhood, which doesn't actually exist, but
Yeah.
but somebody who had like the perfect childhood has no idea what these kids may be feeling or why they may be acting the way that they are. And like you, I know and understand that oftentimes children act out because there's a need that's not being met. And many times it's a need of love or connection or a sense of belonging. They want to know that they're not they're not just cast asides, they're not forgotten. They want to know, we all as human beings have an innate desire to belong. And we were created that way, because we belong to our creator, right? We belong to God. But within our human family, we also have that desire to connect and to belong. And
Mhm.
when, kids who are in an orphanage who do not have, their biological parents and they're under group home care, it's hard to always feel like you belong. It's hard to feel like
Mhm.
you're wanted, like you're loved. And so I just think it's so beautiful that God is using your experiences to turn around and to serve these kids and offer them something that they may not get anywhere else.
Yeah, and I think, the other day I was thinking about how, where do you get hope for ministry? Because what I've noticed is that most kids, no matter, it doesn't matter how many years you've been visiting the orphanage, how many relationships you'll try to build, they're not with you 24/7. They are with all these other friends of theirs and caretakers and the school and all kinds of other influences. And a lot of kids will end up in really bad situations. Most of them. We talked to so many of them, my husband even more, because he lived here and he grew up here, so he's been doing this for 5-6 years. And still it's painful to see how they know the truth in a sense. Some of them even believe it, they confess to believe it, but still they go, some become a part of a gang or start doing drugs or even, prostitution or get pregnant and um, whether get an abortion or give up a kid for adoption or move to a mother's home where there's not so much future for you in the mother's home because they'll kick you out at some point and you don't really have anywhere to go. And a lot of children will end up in the orphanage from the orphan kids, those orphan kids that gave birth to their kids, a lot of them will end up in the orphanage. And it's a bit hard to, like, I sometimes ask myself, is there even any point, to doing all this? But again, I personally just believe that, God will use, like it says that his word doesn't come back void, and he will use everything that we do and everything that we say in those kids' lives. And who knows, maybe now they're just getting a taste, of what it's like to live this free life that seems so attractive. But maybe, 10 years down the road when it feels like it's too much and this life is not, is absolutely not what you wanted and it got you to a place where you never thought you would be, then maybe they will think back, that I heard about God and I know that he's loving and kind and merciful. And if I ask him forgiveness, he'll accept me and he will change my life, And maybe that will one day help, because there are some kids that they confess to believe, they get baptized, they come to church, they, say the right things. And then one day you just see that they just turn away completely. They get a boyfriend at first and it's like very slow, but then it goes more and more and more away. Or, a guy will stop going to school. That's like the first step. That at first he just quits school. And you think, well, okay, he can still find a job. But the problem is that he has all this free time and he's still under 18. And he gets into all kinds of bad companies. And then slowly, it also sucks them in. With girls, it's mainly boyfriends and then getting pregnant and all things like that. And so it is hard, but I think in ministry where we draw hope is probably in the fact that God is doing something and we just doing what he asks us to. We tending to the garden, but maybe we won't be there to see the fruit. And the fruit might come, in 5 years, because some trees take 5 years to start showing fruit. But you still have to faithfully take care of it and, water it, and you don't know. So I guess it's also important for, even for your listeners who are probably, in ministry or caring for somebody, that it is sometimes you won't see the fruit. Maybe you will never see the fruit, but it doesn't mean that God is not faithful and that the task that he entrusted to you doesn't mean that it is fruitless or that you made a mistake, that maybe God didn't call me to this. Maybe, probably you didn't make a mistake. Just God's ways are not our ways and we don't always see the full map, like you said before.
Absolutely. Listen, what you said is absolutely just beautifully put and such a great reminder. It's our job to plant the seed. Um, God tells us, it's our job to be obedient. And so he tells us to plant the seed. And like you said, sometimes we're left in charge of cultivating, we're left in charge of tending and being faithful to care for it. And sometimes we get to see the fruit of that, and sometimes not so much. Um, and other times, God just tells us to plant the seed and walk away. Sometimes it's a chance encounter, or it's, a word that is shared, with someone in a coffee shop or whatever it may be. Our job, like our responsibility, is to be obedient to what he tells us. And when we can put our focus on simply just being obedient and allowing ourselves to truly surrender the outcome, because the outcome is up to God, right? The outcome is not up to us. The outcome is up to God. And when we can just simply be obedient and be faithful with what he has given us to do, then we can trust that no matter what the outcome is, we've done our part, and we can trust that God is faithful to do his. And so I love that you bring that up, because so often we get attached to the outcome of a thing, and the outcome is not necessarily our responsibility. The action at the time, the obedience, the faithfulness to what God is asking us to do, like that's our part. So we have to come into, the situation saying, okay, God, what is my part? And let me not overstep and try to do your part too.
Mhm. Yeah, and I can see such drastic difference in between what ministry looked like for me during those 2 years right after Bible school and what it looks like now. Like you said, that we're not supposed to hold on to the fruit or the outcome. When I just started, my whole motivation was coming from the outcome. I wanted to see the outcome. I wanted to be like those missionaries and those missionary biographies where, so many people came to faith and they did so many great things. There were books written about them. Everybody knows them. And I thought that this is what I want to be again, wanting to, live a big life so that you are loved and cared for at the end, that those traumas from childhood, they kind of carry on with us, even when we're Christian, when we even do ministry a lot of times. And back then, as a missionary, I was getting support. So I was financially supported for what I was doing in ministry. And I think that was also a big factor of me constantly, every single month, trying to find something that I can show to the people, in the newsletters that you have to send every single month. And constantly thinking what happened and feeling that if nothing happened, then somehow your ministry is not worthy or good enough because there's nothing to tell, to show for it to the people. And now I'm enjoying the fact that I don't have to tell anybody what I'm doing. I don't have to keep note of every single conversation I had, every single kid that said something Christian, or any guests that we had over, to account for that. Hey, I invited so many guests over to my house, so many people I fed, there are so many, conversations that I had. And now it rather comes from a place of wanting to do it because you do it for God. And I enjoy it more in that way because I know I'm doing it for Him, rather than back then it felt sometimes superficial because I knew that I was always thinking of what am I going to put in my newsletter the next month. Not to say that newsletters are evil, because you do need to have accountability, but it is a whole different relationship that missionaries have with their newsletters, I think. And I don't have a solution for it, so I'm not going to say that newsletters are wrong because I have nothing to offer for it. Just it is hard because you always have to have that outcome, to show to the people, where not everybody understands that what you said, that we sow the seeds and maybe nothing is going to happen for 5 years, but it doesn't mean we're not faithful. And I'm in a sense enjoying the fact that I'm not in a full-time ministry right now, and that we can support ourselves from just simple jobs. And somehow it took off pressure from me, and now ministry feels more fulfilling even in some ways.
Absolutely. Yeah, when we realize that our true accountability is to God, and we kind of shift our perspective and understand that, the work that I'm doing, and I can completely relate to the stress of having to show um it's almost like having to show performance, like what having to accountability is absolutely yes, we definitely need it. But again, sometimes things really do take time to develop. And when we look at it and see, okay, well, I need to have something to show for it, right? I
Mhm.
need to have some kind of tangible something to show for it. I definitely understand how that can become much more stressful, because then our focus becomes on what do I have to show for it, instead of, just simply allowing God to use you as He will. So
Mhm.
I totally understand, and I don't have an answer for it either. So so we'll just have to leave them to come up with something else. But Natasha, I would love for our listeners at home to be able to connect with you when the show is over. So tell us how they can contact you. What's the best place to find you? And of course, I'll have all the links down in the show notes, but tell us how our friends can connect with you when the show is over.
I am on my Facebook, which is Natasha Lévai, so it's the same name as in the podcast. And I don't think there's so many people with the same name, because it's like Natasha is like Russian, Lévai it's Hungarian, so it's a mix. But also on Instagram, it's Natasha's Home, because I only have the Instagram for the food blog. I don't have a personal Instagram because it's too much social media for me. It's Facebook is enough for me, and email. That's the best. Of course I check my emails too, but I guess Facebook and Instagram are the fastest ways and the easiest ways.
All right, perfect. Well, we will make sure that the links for those are down in the show notes. And Natasha, I just want to say thank you so much for being here with us today, for coming and for just opening up your heart and sharing your story. It has definitely been a beautiful conversation. I know it's touched my heart, and I'm sure that it has touched the hearts of the listeners as well. So I just want to thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an honor for me to be here and chat with you.
Hey, friend, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. It's my pleasure, as always, to be here with you. If what you listened to today resonated with you, if you enjoyed listening to the show, do me a favor. Go ahead and like and subscribe to this podcast and leave a review. Those reviews are so helpful. I can't even tell you how much I appreciate each and every single one of them. And go ahead and share this episode out with a friend. Invite them along for a walk through the Word, and let's enjoy that daily bread together. See you tomorrow.